This beautiful forest is one of many in the Rhineland. Around 1843, most of these forests were private property. The poor people could not cut woods from these forests. However, they were allowed to pick fallen branches as firewood. But in the early 1840s, a forest law was passed. According to the law, commoners were forbidden from picking the fallen woods. This was very painful law for the poor. The poor needed woods to keep their homes warm. They violated the new rules and thus fell victim to the black law of the jungle. Some died, others suffered. But the law of the jungle gave birth to Karl Marx out of Dr. Marx. How did the jungle law change Karl Marx forever? Why did Marx betray his green-eyed girlfriend? Marx received his doctorate degree from the University of Jena in 1841. Then he moved to the city of Cologne in search of job. One of his friends, Adolf Rutenberg, was editor of a liberal newspaper, Rheinische Zeitung. Many other liberals also liked young Marx. Those people were impressed by his grip on philosophy and his revolutionary ideas. Marx had grown a beard during his days at the university. The beard gave him a dominating look. Other people were in awe of his personality. Interestingly, Marx had a lisp problem, but his personality and strong arguments dominated everyone. Many people were even afraid of his personality. Wherever he went, he was always in the limelight. In Cologne, Karl Marx also wrote some articles for the newspaper Zeitung. Then he was offered an editor's job in the same newspaper. He accepted the offer. Marx improved the quality of the newspaper and increased its circulation. It soon became the favorite newspaper of all liberal circles in Germany. Though Marx made the newspaper a successful one, yet there were some problems too. This was because Karl Marx strongly disliked government restrictions on newspapers. He was a philosopher. He was more inclined to think freely and to communicate freely to others. He did not like any restriction on freedom of expression. But Germany had strict censorship laws. Government officers censored every newspaper and removed the offending articles. They never allowed offending articles to be published. But the censor officers were not intellectual people. They could not understand the philosophy and nature of those articles. The subtleties of philosophy were beyond their mental approach. Because of their ignorance, they often allowed offending news to be published while blocked other unoffending news items. Even their superiors were stupid. Whenever they found out about a published offending news item, they simply shut down the newspaper. The authorities had shut down a newspaper of one of Marx's friends, Arnold Ruge, in the same manner. It was Marx's duty to save his newspaper from the same fate. So it was a challenge for Marx to counter the censorship and censorship officers. But sometimes he acted like a naughty person and teased the censor officers. Once he deliberately didn't inform the censor's office about a press holiday. Now the censor officer waited till late night for the newspaper draft, but didn't receive it. At last the annoyed officer went to Marx's home and demanded the draft. Marx replied from a window that it was a press holiday and the newspaper would not be published. The poor officer was angry, but he couldn't do anything and returned home. Karl Marx didn't like censorship, but sometimes he took advantage of the ignorance of the censor officers. He used their ignorance to publish articles which were offending to the government. For example, Karl Marx published articles against censorship in his newspaper. These articles couldn't be censored. As Katil Shafai put it, that it was the ignorance that saved the tavern, otherwise nobody could toast anymore. Marx said that public criticism was the real censorship. He likened the official censorship to that of a quack doctor's treatment. In his articles, he also sharply criticized those who did only lip service to the freedom of press. Those people never took any practical steps for press freedom. Despite the censorship and Marx's teasing naughty behavior, his newspaper survived for some time. But ironically, at that time, Karl Marx was not aware of the basics of communism. He had little or no knowledge of this ideology. The ideology or the term communism was not Marx's invention. Communism is a form of socialism, and the term was in use at the time when Marx was the editor of Zeitung. You know, the supporters of socialism wanted a labor-friendly government. But Marx knew nothing of socialism or communism. Even a few times when he tried to argue with his friends about it, he got fed up. Then some new laws pushed Marx towards communism, and he declared it the savoir of humanity. It was the laws of the jungle that changed Marx's mind. Now Marx was a native of the Rhineland region, and his family also lived in Trier, Rhineland. The Rhineland was rich in forests. Every city or town was surrounded by forests. These forests were private property. Ordinary people were not allowed to cut trees in these forests. However, they were allowed to pick fallen branches and use them as firewood. In this way, those forests remained clean, and it benefited the poor as well. That was a centuries-old custom, and no one ever objected to that. But in early 1840s, the forest owners suddenly realized that the poor were stealing their wood. They believed that the poor had no right to take away the fallen wood. So the powerful people passed some rules that later became known as the laws of the jungle. According to those laws, picking up the fallen wood was a crime and punishable by imprisonment. The owner could determine the price of the fallen wood and then take it from the poor. It meant that the rich could do anything, but the poor had no rights. These laws were really the laws of the jungle. The people of the Rhineland firmly opposed those laws. But the government strictly enforced the new laws. Therefore, whoever violated those laws was arrested. In a short span of time, 150,000 cases were registered against the poor. It was the passage of the jungle laws that brought Karl Marx closer to communism. Though he had been observing the between rich and poor since he lived in the city of Trier, he had seen that the rich owners of vineyards in his city were getting richer every day, while the poor people working in those vineyards were getting poorer. The majority of the people in his city were poor and forced into begging and prostitution. Marx had observed these problems closely, but didn't know who was responsible or how to resolve them. But now, as a journalist, he was clearly watching that those were the rich people who actually exploited the poor. Marx could not remain silent. He wrote some articles against the laws of the jungle. In those articles, Marx sharply criticized the laws and passed harsh remarks on the government officials. Poor censorship could not filter those articles. But once they were published, the high-ranking officials were angry. Marx's name was not written on the articles, so he survived. But the government took action against the newspaper. The governor of Rhineland called on the Prussian government to prosecute the anonymous author of the articles. The governor said that the Zeitung newspaper had disgraced the government. Marx quickly adopted a conciliatory tone. He also wrote a soothing letter to the governor in which he expressed his good wishes for the Prussian king. He was obviously doing all this to keep himself and the newspaper alive. But despite this letter, the relations between the government and the newspaper soon reached the breaking point. Then on January 21, 1843, a messenger from Berlin arrived in Cologne on horseback. The messenger brought a federal order revoking the license of Zeitung beyond March 1843. Zeitung's previous license was only valid until March. Now the government was not going to renew it after that. Surprisingly, this order was given directly by King Frederick William IV of Prussia. This royal decree surprised Marx and his friends. They could not understand why did the king intervene to shut down the newspaper. Marx thought that perhaps it was some articles in support of farmers that angered the government. Little did Marx and his colleagues know that there was another great game going on behind the scenes. The order to shut down the newspaper came not from Berlin but directly from Russia. Yes, it was not the King of Prussia, but the King of Russia, Tsar Nicholas I, who ordered the closure of Marx's newspaper. Actually, Zeitung had published an article on January 4, 1843. This author had criticized the Russian government. Prussia was Russia's ally in the 1840s. When the Russian government learned of the article, the Prussian ambassador to Russia was summoned. the Russian government asked the ambassador how the German press could insult them despite strict censorship. The Prussian ambassador told his government in Berlin about the incident. As a result, the newspaper was shut down. However, Marx discovered the real reason behind this closure after a long time. It is an irony that the Tsar didn't know that these would be Marx's ideas that would ultimately overthrow the Russian monarchy. If the Tsar had somehow known the future, then probably Marx would not have lived longer. However, at the behest of his friend Nicholas I, the Prussian king shut down Zeitung. Following the closure, Zeitung, the German press, published a cartoon in which Karl Marx was portrayed in the style of his ideal Greek god Prometheus. In this cartoon, Marx was tied to a printing press and the eagle of censorship was trying to rip his liver out. Thus, Marx practically represented his ideal god, while the liberals of Germany were upset at Zeitung's closure. Marx was surprisingly happy. Yes, he was happy that he was now free of censorship. He was now free to choose his own path. "I'm suffocating in this environment," he told his friend Arnold Ruge. He said that it was hopeless to win a sword fight with needles. Marx declared that the government had given him back his freedom. Though Karl Marx was rejoicing, but he was concerned too. He had realized that free speech was a hopeless cause in Germany. He knew that the censorship in Germany could not be lifted without a revolution. Now he wanted a sanctuary outside Germany to continue his revolutionary struggle. He had no interest in Germany anymore. All his close relatives and friends were gone long ago. His father, Heinrich Marx, who was his closest friend, had long since passed away. After his death, Karl Marx had lost his mother too. Marx's mother was against his revolutionary activities and wanted him to share her financial burden. But when that didn't happen, she never spoke to Marx again. In a way, Marx practically lost his mother. Karl Marx had a harsh behavior, so many of his old friends had become his enemies. Even his close friends were not happy with him. Those who were impressed by his personality in the past were now leaving him. Government officials and rich were already against him. So, Marx was practically alone in Germany. His only real friend was his green-eyed fiancée Jenny. Jenny was with him even in the most difficult of circumstances, waiting for him. But Marx's attitude did not spare even her. It had been 7 years since their engagement. This long duration had created misunderstandings between them. Marx had little contact with Jenny during his in the university, and later as an editor in Cologne. Letters were the only source of communication in those days. But every letter took weeks or months to reach its destination. As a result, misunderstandings arose between the two lovebirds. Jenny was rich and had many rich relatives and family friends. Those rich people didn't like Karl Marx because of his revolutionary activities. These rich relatives and friends of Jenny and many of Marx's relatives didn't want the couple to marry. During Marx's absence from Trier, it was Jenny who alone had to counter all the opposition to their marriage. Jenny was heartbroken because of all the opposition. Even Marx didn't comfort her. Marx thought that Jenny was fed up with him and wanted to end their engagement. His rude replies upset poor Jenny more. Jenny complained that Marx doubted her love, and Marx thought Jenny was tired of him. During this time, Marx also allegedly betrayed Jenny. He fell in love with an old German poetess. Sadly, he even took this woman to Trier and introduced her to Jenny. This meeting was really hard for Jenny, yet she continued to love Marx and did not break up with him. Jenny once wrote a letter to Marx to make him feel his attitude. She declared that Marx had no idea of her sufferings. If he could become a girl like her, only then he could have understood. However, all these misunderstandings could not separate them. Marx broke up with the German poetess and was with Jenny again. When Marx decided to leave Germany, he first went to Jenny's house and married her. Only a few of her friends and in-laws attended the wedding. His mother and other family members did not attend the wedding. Marx's mother-in-law gave her daughter jewelry and a silver plate along with a box full of money. She wanted the couple to start a new life with that money. But Marx and Jenny all that money during their honeymoon. Later, Jenny's silver plate and jewelry were also given to moneylenders to get financial aid. After marriage, Karl Marx spent 6 months with his in-laws. He didn't know where to go now. He decided to join his friend Arnold Rouge in Paris. Arnold Rouge was trying to publish a newspaper from Paris. Rouge had offered Marx a job in his new newspaper, and Marx had accepted the offer. Marx had decided to design a system that would end the difference between poor and rich. So in 1843, Marx moved to Paris with his bride Jenny to begin a new chapter of his life and history. What Marx faced during his exile? Who became his closest companion in his struggle for communism? What was the answer of the 3 questions of Karl Marx? How did Marx prepare the Communist Manifesto? We will show you all this in the next episode of Marx's biography.